They tell you heartbreak sounds like shouting, but the loudest thing in my apartment that night was painter's tape peeling from aluminum lids. Soft, decisive, impossible to argue with. Rain inched down the windows in weary threads, and my kitchen island looked like a small airport. Labeled trays in tight formation, wooden spoons resting like runway lights, a schedule pinned to the fridge that mapped every oven temp, every minute, every prayer. That was the backdrop when Ava lifted her eyes and said, "My ex is coming to my family's harvest night, so you shouldn't." As if ruining me could be softened to a scheduling note. My name is Noah Ellis. I'm 31, I produce events for a living, and I love people the way architects love angles, by honoring what holds weight. Planning is not control, it's consideration made visible. I'd built a feast for her family with the kind of devotion that doesn't brag. Some people bring a bottle of wine and smile through awkward stories. I bring color-coded spreadsheets and an unused Plan B because I intend for Plan A to be enough. Ava used to call my checklists poetry. She'd run her finger down my timelines like a devout person tracing scripture. Somewhere along the way, the same lines began to look like bars. We met 2 years earlier at a lantern festival by the canal. Her candle had drowned in its tin before it could catch, and I knelt to shield a new flame with my palm. She laughed, a bright, embarrassing sound like a surprise confession, and said I moved like a person who always knows the wind. She was an installation artist back then, 28, stitching light to wire and turning warehouses into auroras. I fell for her before the wax even cooled. Part of me is still at that water's edge, learning what devotion is by watching paper boats become constellations. Harvest night meant everything to her, a family tradition older than her first sketchbook, an autumn table that rivaled any holiday. I wanted to be a part of it the way kids want first snow. Body first, pure, with belief that what lands will stay. I hunted down her grandmother's pear and fennel tart recipe by triangulating rumors. A quiet librarian remembered the bakery envelope the recipe lived in. A retired baker remembered the ratio of anise to fennel seed by touching her wrist like she could feel the way time vibrates in spice. I baked until my oven clock felt like a partner. When Ava's mother tried my tart, she cried, "This tastes like my mother's hands." The compliment threaded a new warmth through my ribs. But while I chased ghosts and taught sugar to crack like it used to, a name began to appear like a watermark beneath every conversation. Felix, an old flame, newly back in Seattle. "A friend," she'd say. The way she said friend had a crack in it, like a plate that will break if you put heat to it again. He took her to spontaneous live-weld performances. He reminded her of who she was before she went safe. I stood there with parchment paper and a stupid smile, absolute in the quiet ceremony of soaking pears in wine as if that could anchor a person made of wind. I ignored the pangs. People reconnect. People name-drop. People test old selves like sweaters found under a bed. Do they still fit, or do they just smell like dust? I measured cinnamon and breathed through it. And then I brought Ava a test tart, warm from the oven, light-catching sugar-studded pears like a miracle deciding it could be quiet. She took a bite like she was doing me a favor, and then looked back at her phone. "Yeah, it's good." As if I dropped off mediocre leftovers. As if I hadn't called 3 elderly strangers to borrow their memories. Something in me sank like a boat that didn't realize the lake had dried up. I tried to speak the fear like a grown-up. "Are we all right?" I asked, fingers pressed into the counter as if it could read my pulse and translate. "You're distant. I'm talking to you from across a canyon." She sighed the sigh of people who have practiced it in a mirror. "It's just everything's so planned with you," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Like even breathing gets scheduled. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm changing. Felix thinks spontaneity is where life happens. He says control is just fear in a tie." The words came wearing his cologne. The hurt came raw, smelling like hot sugar gone bitter. 3 days before harvest night, she came with her key and that brittle courage people wear when they've already decided who gets hurt. "I invited Felix," she said. "If we both come, it'll be tense. You should skip it this year." This year, like we were talking about a flu season, I looked around my kitchen at the care made manifest. The muslin sachets stuffed with mulling spices, the tart crusts shelled and ready, the roasting schedule pinned with tiny magnets shaped like pears because I'd become ridiculous in my joy. I felt a quiet land inside me, heavy and holy as a final amen. Okay, I said. Then I opened my fridge and started packing everything into bags, labeled, stacked, safe for transport. Noah, what are you doing? Her voice rose an octave, panic skittering across the surface like water that won't boil. Delivering every promise I made, I said, my voice far away, like a neighbor's radio. Your mother is expecting this tart. Your father is expecting the cider to taste like memory. Your family deserves their ritual, even if I'm not invited to witness it. She reached, then withdrew. She said my name 3 times like it could undo the physics of consequence. I zipped the last bag. I handed it to her. My hands were steady. My hands had always been steady. When the door shut, the apartment felt too big for a person who'd just been resized. I ordered sesame noodles and ate them cross-legged on the floor with a fork because chopsticks felt like ceremony, and I was done blessing what hurt me. My mother texted, as if mothers have a siren inside them that goes off when their sons use takeout to plug new holes. A lighthouse doesn't chase ships, she wrote. It just stays lit. I turned off the kitchen light and sat with the blue glare of the open laptop, timeline still glowing, oven time still telling a future that wasn't mine anymore. I didn't sleep, but I didn't break either. Sometimes resilience just looks like breathing all the way to morning. The morning after harvest night, my phone woke up mean. Notifications stacked like a bad Jenga. At 9:12 a.m., I'm sorry. At 10:05, we burned the tart. Felix said tarts are performative. At 10:42, does your spice sachet need to go in before the simmer or after? It smells like feet. Then later, when her pride had exhausted itself, my mom asked where you were. I said you got called into a gig. She knew I was lying. My dad opened the cider and didn't drink it. He just held it like it could explain me. I muted the phone, then unmuted it, then muted it again. Grief makes you weird with objects. You think a button can control a tidal pattern. I made tea in the mug my sister gave me with a pun about time that used to be funny and wasn't today. I looked at the schedule I hadn't taken down from the fridge. It still told the truth, even if no one followed it. My brain kept wanting to defend me in a courtroom I didn't ask to be summoned to. Exhibit A, the muslin. Exhibit B, the pears. Exhibit C, the endless hole of being misunderstood by a person who once used your lists as lullabies. At 5:27 p.m., the text that made something in me unclench without softening. He left, she wrote. He said family dinners feel like museums and he wasn't dressed for quiet. He took my jacket by mistake. There's a doom that comes only after spectacle, the hangover of people who prefer fireworks to stars. I didn't reply. Not then. Not at midnight when the messages shifted to apologies that looked like confessionals built with borrowed bricks. Not Monday morning when she called crying so hard she hiccuped. I answered then because I'm not a punisher, I'm a person. He said he wasn't looking for serious, she sobbed. He said I'm soft for liking rituals. He said I want ceremony because I'm scared of chaos. Noah, I messed up so badly. You tucked napkins under the plates to keep the draft from making them flutter. You warmed the mugs so the cider would taste like comfort right away. You thought ahead for the exact moment we didn't know we'd need help. Her breath caught like a skipped heartbeat. I called it suffocating because I didn't know how to accept being cared for without paying for it with wildness. I leaned against the sink and watched a line of sun attempt to rehearse itself on my countertop. Ava, I said, and I meant the name in the old way like hope. You didn't reject a menu, you rejected my mother tongue. You were asking me to be an instinct without bones. There are sentences that arrive like an inheritance. This was one. I softened my voice around it. I don't hate you, I'm not angry. I'm tired of trying to breathe shallow to make someone else comfortable. I'm a long, slow breath. That's who I am. You're a gust. That's who you are. It's no one's fault the weather changed. She wept. I let her. Sometimes kindness is just not making a person feel alone while they meet themselves. Then I ended the call, and didn't answer the next one, or the next. After the avalanche came the quiet. I bought clay with my refund from the pairs I didn't use and signed up for a ceramics class in a studio that smelled like rain and dust and beginnings. Clay keeps score, but it forgives if you return to it with wet hands. I made bowls that wobbled and then bowls that didn't. I joined a sunrise trail group because the world at 5:30 a.m. is a clean page. On the trail, the person with the headlamp is a saint. The one with extra socks is a savior. No one calls those people controlling. They call them the reason everyone gets home. Week by week, I turned toward unremarkable joys and watched them unfurl like ferns. The old woman who reads only paperbacks on the number 8 bus and smooths the cover like it's a sleeping cat. The barista who wears disco ball earrings on Thursdays and never explains. A kid learning to whistle and then deciding not to because failure is too loud, then trying again anyway. I took photos that didn't need likes to make sense. I grew basil in my window. I returned to being the sort of person who keeps pens because the world is always forgetting them. That's how I met Eliza Park, whose tote bag split in the spine next to a pop-up book fair under the monorail. She's 4'11" and laughs like she's tripping down a hill she refuses to control. She's a 4th-grade teacher, which is to say she holds chaos like it's a kitten who needs both a nap and revolution. She put her hand through the torn canvas with an embarrassed sound. I pulled gaffer tape from my backpack and a spare carabiner from my key ring. "I knew I'd like you," she said at once. "Why?" I asked, smoothing the tape. "Because you expected something to break, and you came anyway." We built slowly, like people who have learned that rushing is just another religion. On our first picnic at Golden Gardens, I unpacked a color-coded cooler and braced for the flinch. People flinch at me. They translate care into control because it's written in a dialect they don't trust. Eliza's face did the opposite of flinch. It lit. "You thought of everything," she said, biting into cracked pepper strawberries. "I didn't even know what I'd need, and you packed it." She said it with awe, not accusation. It lodged somewhere new in me, a door that opened into a room with windows I didn't know I'd rented. By the end of that season, my apartment had acquired a second toothbrush and a vase that only ever held eucalyptus. My playlists learned her childhood favorites, and my calendar learned to be a place where intention wasn't an apology. Sometimes at night when the rain argued with the gutters, Eliza would murmur, "You design wonder like a mechanic, and that makes it stronger, not smaller." I slept then, deep, whole, full of a future that didn't feel like asking a universe for permission I'd already earned. A year after the night I boxed up a feast and handed it to someone else's table, the city put on its softer lights. Theo, our mutual friend, paints murals that look like weather and throws parties that feel like everyone's favorite birthday at once. He'd invited us to his studio, brick walls, ladders like prayer, paint trays dried into galaxies. Eliza wore a navy dress with pockets. All the best dresses have pockets. And I brought a bottle of sparkling apple cider with a handwritten label, because I'm still me and I forgot to pretend otherwise. Ava stood near a stack of flattened cardboard, scanning her phone like it owed her a portal. She looked exactly like herself and nothing like who I remembered. The shape was the same, but something in the light was wrong. When her eyes found me, she smiled like a practiced dance, all tilt and no heat. She approached, careful, the way people approach a house they used to live in after someone else has painted the door. "Noah," she said, and the syllable was soft with ghosts. "You look steady." Eliza's fingers tightened around mine in a way that meant, "I'm here, not he is mine." I introduced them. Ava's gaze skittered, then settled, then lifted with something like surrender. "I owe you more than a text message," she began. I braced, not for begging, she'd already done that, but for the kind of truth that requires both of us to stand very still. "I mistook spectacle for depth," she said, making eye contact like it cost her. "I thought fireworks meant more than stars because they were louder," she swallowed. "You were building a home and I called it a trap." I am, she broke off, eyes shining in a way that made me ache for both of us. I am sorry. It's strange, the mercy that arrives when you've stopped waiting for it. Thank you, I said simply. There was a version of me that would have delivered a speech about lessons and losses, but the current version trusted silence to do the heavy lifting. I hope you find a way to love that lets you breathe without setting the curtains on fire, I added, almost smiling. Eliza nodded to her, kindness a language she speaks even when no one deserves subtitles. We drifted toward Theo's newest mural, where cobalt bled into rose gold and a thin line of gold leaf split a storm like a promise kept. On the ride home, the city was a wet postcard. Eliza rested her head on my shoulder and said, I almost felt sorry for her. I watched light smear into lines. She didn't give up someone who loved her, I said. She gave up a dialect she didn't recognize as love. Eliza hummed. And now I'm fluent with someone who speaks back, I said, and felt a tenderness expand in my chest like breath after a long tunnel. A ring had been waiting in my top drawer in a small linen pouch, pretending to be patient. Antique platinum, a thin crescent engraved inside the band, the kind of ring that remembers other fingers and still says yes. I'd found it in a shop that smells like velvet and lemon oil after 5 Saturdays, and a half-dozen espressos that made me label things in my head that didn't need labels. Street corners, birds, the exact color of Eliza's laugh. She'd once told me that she loves objects that have kept their promises. They're second chances with a memory, she said. I want to be that. A promise that remembers. So I planned, because love is logistics when it's honest. A sunrise ferry to Bainbridge. Cardamom coffee in 2 thermoses. 3 blankets because she always underestimates wind and I overestimate comfort. I made a playlist that moves like dawn. Max Richter sighing into Joni Mitchell shrugging into pure quiet. I folded a note in my wallet on thick watercolor paper. You weren't a detour. You were the map. I tucked the ring into my jacket's inside pocket where heartbeat heat could teach it our rhythm. The night before I set 6 alarms and slept through most of them, because sometimes excitement wears the same coat as exhaustion. In the fragile hours I made lists I didn't need, like a good luck ritual. Check batteries. Check tripod. Check courage. I imagined the bluff, the cold air, the impossibly kind sound of the sound. I imagined the word yes leaving her mouth like a bird who never doubted it could fly. I thought of who I used to be. A boy confusing shrinking with compromise, mistaking silence for peace. I promised him we were almost there. I taped a small envelope to the inside of our front door, open after sunrise, because I like building tiny future delights into the day, like Easter eggs for the hours we haven't met. Inside, I'd written a list titled Reasons This Is a Good Idea, and it was ridiculous and truer than anything. Because you laugh like you invented the sound, because you like quiet like it isn't punishment, because you keep the pen even when you don't need it, because my hands are steadier when they're near yours. We caught the first ferry, the one filled with fishermen who know dawn by its gentleness, dog walkers in sensible raincoats, and the few of us whose hearts had a deadline. The deck smelled like salt and wet rope, and the kind of beginning that makes you superstitious. Eliza wore a knit hat she didn't admit she'd chosen, because it made her eyes look like the part of the sky where the blue keeps a secret. I handed her a thermos. She handed me a napkin she'd doodled on, a lighthouse with a small heart in the beam. For the keeper, she said, and the universe did its favorite bit, subtle as a cymbal crash. We hiked the cedar trail to the bluff, the forest waking up in slow focus. A crow argued with itself. The path curled and then straightened, a ribbon learning how to be a line. The bluff opened like a held breath finally released. The city lay across the water like a rumor. The sound was a mirror that forgot to be still. I spread the blanket and unpacked warm scones wrapped in a tea towel still breathing cinnamon. She bit and closed her eyes, and I knew there is no word more faithful than fed. I'd rehearsed the speech, of course, not to make it polished, only to make it true in my own mouth. There was a time, I began, when I thought love meant shrinking to fit someone else's wholly. She looked at me, wide open. I thought if I made fewer lists I'd deserve more joy. If I didn't label the jars, the world wouldn't call me controlling. But this, I gestured to the thermoses, the blankets, the early fairy, her breath making little weather. This is my love language. I don't want to be a blank page. I want to be an atlas. I took out the ring, small and luminous as a yes that already knows itself. Eliza Park, will you marry me? Some yesies are shy. Hers wasn't. Yes, she said, smiling like the sun just remembered where the switch is. I slid the ring on and it sat there like it had been practicing. A bald eagle underlined the sky with a long, dark sentence. Two hikers down the path clapped. We laughed the ridiculous laugh of people who have been caught being lucky. We cried, too. The wind took the salt and threw it back in our faces for emphasis. On the ferry back, I texted my mother a photo of our hands and the horizon. She sent a lighthouse and a heart and wrote, "Trim the wick, keep the lens clean, keep watch." I tucked my face into Eliza's hat and said, "I'm going to label our jars for now and for later like a joke that is also a vow." She kissed my temple. "Promise me we'll keep making a life you can list without apology." "That's the only kind I know how to build," I said, and for once, knowing how wasn't an accusation. It was salvation. We stopped by Theo's studio that evening to show him the ring. The mural was finished, a storm parting with a glimmering seam of gold leaf, a whisper in graphite almost hidden at eye level, "Keep choosing the version of you that loves brave." Theo hugged us and poured cider like he was baptizing a future. Eliza ran her finger over the gold seam. "Sometimes the break is the most beautiful part," she said. "Kintsugi," I answered, blessing the fracture with attention. At home, I taped the reasons this is a good idea list to the inside of a cabinet we open daily, a liturgy of reminders. I labeled 2 glass jars just like I promised, and we laughed because the joke worked from both directions. We made pasta and ate it standing up because chairs felt too ceremonial for the day's ease. The window fogged. The city hummed. I thought of the boy boxing up a feast no one wanted him to serve, and I wanted to tell him, "You weren't too much. You were accurate. You were a person building warmth against a draft. Keep building. The right one will bring a chair. The right one will stir the pot. The right one will ask what time the ferry leaves and be early." People think happily ever after is the hard stop at the end of a sentence. It isn't. It's a practice. It is the choosing and the choosing and the choosing. To pack the spare gloves, to print the ferry schedule, to text the friend who needs an anchor, to label the jar because memory is busy. It is the promise that when life gets loud, someone will still remember the smallest hinge and fix it before the door falls. The world idolizes fireworks. Our life is constellations, quiet, steady, ancient, and bright enough to navigate by. The right person doesn't ask a lighthouse to dim. They build their home where its beam feels like morning.